Hi friends, this is the Be Real Babe podcast, a place where your average Canadian wolfpack come together to talk about life stresses, messes, and successes. A safe space where being yourself is the ultimate goal. Each week we will bring you new episodes sharing our experiences on a ton of different topics in hopes we get a better understanding of ourselves, each other, and this crazy world we live in. We want to build a community where we can show up as ourselves, be real, and lay it all out there. By sharing our experiences, we hope to reach others who can relate so we can all help each other learn, grow, and heal. But please keep in mind, as a disclaimer, none of us here are professionals. No one is giving any advice. We are strictly speaking of our life experiences, our opinions, and for entertainment purposes only. Now, with that being said, grab your drink, grab your joint, and let's jump right in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Be Real Babe podcast. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for stopping by the show today. We hope that you have a good time. And if you're a returning watcher, listener, supporter, thank you guys so fucking much from the bottom of our hearts from coming back time and time again. For those that don't know me, my name is Brandy and I am the host of the show. And today, y'all, we're on episode 93. Are we being programmed? Yes. Oh, sorry. That was a hypothetical question. I mean, everyone can feel how they want to feel about this, but I think, wrapping up our month of, like Disney, Hollywood, and all this, it kind of all plays a part. We've talked about in the last couple episodes, how Pedo Island and all that shit's kind of hidden and like atrocities are happening there. But it's done by people that do this entertainment, and that entertainment is it programming us to think certain ways, leading us to believe certain things, having these ideals, and we talk about, societal standards. Do these come from the influence in pop culture and movies and Disney and things like that? And I think a lot of us can agree over the last couple of years, you hear some people on repeat with some of the mainstream media news, and you kind of wonder, like, do you truly feel that way? Are you just repeating what you hear? Or this as facts? Or, because I've been guilty of it myself years and years ago. A couple years ago, I realized like how plugged in I was and how reliant I was, and how most of my thoughts and how I felt and certain things that I thought I cared about were actually attached to people outside of that, like celebrities or certain political figures. Maybe not so much political, but you know what I mean? Like, or I realized how attached I was to like how I had to watch a show, and if I didn't see it that week, or it was canceled, my life was over and things were so shitty. And I really started to realize how that really took an effect in my life. And that's why I think this is important to talk about. Most of us grew up on Disney, and although, yeah, to a degree, it's innocent. If you want to look at it perfect, there is a lot to that, but it's not even that. It's more of like what a woman should be, or what a man should be, or what people's roles are, and it's kind of, if you're not bringing awareness to it or having those conversations with your kids, and I think that it's very easy for them to come up with these different ideas, like I'm here in adulthood, like 36 in a couple weeks here when this launches in a week, and I'm like, where is the animals, like cleaning my house here? Like, I'm always having to clean up after the animals in my house. I feel like I was fucking lied to. And just these unrealistic standards that, not just Disney, but that's where it starts, right? And movies put on. And if we're not having those conversations and those awareness that, this is a made up story, this isn't real life, all those things, what kind of damage is that doing? I would like to know. Anyways, that's kind of the introduction to the show. I have an amazing guest that is a fan of the show that turned into a guest. So I just want to take a moment to you guys. If you have a topic you want to talk about your personal life, or conspiracy, or political, or whatever you're passionate about, please reach out. And don't think that your story, and I said this time and time again, don't think that your story or you as an individual shouldn't reach out. We want you to. We want to share stuff. It'll not only help us learn, it helps our community learn, and it puts you on a platform to meet other people and to learn yourself. So make sure you're reaching out. I actually, you'll find out on this episode, we just jam in the DM sometimes. I'm just like, hey, come on the show. Let's talk about this, because it's fun, right? So I'm very excited for our guests to come on and share a little bit more about, are we being programmed? But if you can, especially if you're on YouTube, guys, make sure you like this video, make sure you are subscribing, make sure you are turning on those notifications for Apple, Spotify, so that follow us on Instagram. Make sure you're commenting, DM us, tag us in your favorite. if you have time and you love us, please take a minute to put a review on. That really helps other people find our show. And as always, guys, okay, babes, let's get on to our show and talk about the topic at hand, y'all. So excited for my guest. I have been fangirling this girl in my inbox for longer than I'd like to admit. And I'd like to introduce her, Leticia. Hey, babe, how's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for having me here. Like, I'm always
Thank you.
do
Thank you
something.
for giving me fire conversations. Like every time I post something, I do have you in mind when it comes to this specific topic because we've had such great conversations. And I'm like, oh, she's going to like this one. And then all of a sudden I'll get like an emoji. I'm like, there it is. There it is.
Yeah, we've had, hey, like it's been like just randomly and then we kind of go deep and we're like, hey, and then I was like, it'd be cool to be on her podcast and then you invited me on and I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Sometimes you like people think that manifestation and all that doesn't work. And then you put that idea out there and then it happens and you're like, okay, what kind of like voodoo magic shit is happening here? I don't care, but I'm into it. Like I'm
Yeah,
into it. And it is,
yeah, that's
it's
literally what happened.
yeah, and it's just fun because like the conversations we want to have are just the people that, were drawn to us that had a lot of similarities and that were wanting to have these conversations that were maybe taboo in their friend groups or, it's kind of hard when you start going down these rabbit holes and finding these things and you're like can't talk normal about normal stuff and people are like, "So, how's this?" and you're like, "Have you heard about Epstein though? Like, have you? Do you know what's going on?" You just can't
And
be
you're
a normal human
like, is
anymore.
the person to talk about this or are they still not awake? Like,
Exactly. And you're like,
how
oh,
are they?
babes. Yeah, the babes, they will take it. I can send them this and they will love it. And it's true. Every time we're like, oh, love it when people send us memes or stories or clips about any of the stuff we talk about. We're like, yes, community. We're not alone. We're
We're not crazy.
not crazy. Like, because you feel alone when you first, go through all these things. And especially when you jump out of the matrix, let's say, and you start to see it, it kind of snowballs. And I don't know about you, but I had a low key freak out moment of like
Oh yeah.
midlife crisis. Like,
Yeah,
what
of
is real?
course.
Right? Like, where do I start? What's real? Who's lying? Someone's lying. Someone's lying.
Yeah, in the last 2 years, for sure, it's been a lot of awakening. And it's like, it doesn't end. It's like the more you start learning and questioning things, the more you're like, oh my gosh, like I've been totally blind to this. And it's like, sometimes some things take like a couple of weeks to like process, and you're like, holy, whether it's like in the nutritional side, in
Yeah.
the pandemic side, like everything really, it's like you've just learned to start being more critical about things and like, is this true or is this just what I've been told to believe? Right.
And as I feel as Canadians, we're just like, believe it. Like people are good people. And I generally believe that there are good people. Like I don't really think like the whole world's terrible. But I think there's a lot of people that aren't in touch with their soul and that leads them to questionable actions and things. And yeah, the pandemic woke me right up to everything. And before, like, I love that reel that gets posted and it's like you in your 20s, like taking random pills at a rave. And you're like,
Uh,
yeah, to like in your 30s, looking at the ingredients on vitamins to make sure that they're like ethically sourced. And it's so true because like in my 20s, it was just living and, who am I going to be? What am I going to be? And then all my 30s, I was like, I have no fucking idea. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, well, you got to figure it out. You got time. And then instead of looking at myself, I just looked at everything else. And it actually led me to who I want to be now by looking at all
mm,
this stuff and being like, I don't want this fake celebrity lifestyle with all these chemically products and this fake connection and like I just
conversations, right? Like just going through the motions.
yes, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but like for me, it was kind of like right at the beginning of the pandemic. I think before then, there's a couple things before that, like birth control and how they treated cannabis. That was like very like, okay, this is weird to me. But it was very at the very first lockdown. I was like, things are weird. Like I feel weird. There's something weird. And it was just a snowball from there. Is that kind of where it happened to you? You're just like, I have all this spare time. I got to look at stuff. And oh, I found some things.
Yeah, like for me, I think 2020 was just a huge year. Not just, what was happening around the world, but personally, like I was going through a lot internally, figuring out what I wanted. Like you're going through the motions and you're like, I'm not happy and like this doesn't
Totally.
feel right.
Yeah.
Um,
Been
you
there.
know, whether it's, relationships you're in and just in general, like,
Mhm.
um,
Your
I
environment.
I had a baby, so life changes once you
Mhm.
have another human being that you're responsible for, and you start
Totally.
paying attention to things. You're like, is this what I want her to be in? And
Mhm.
is this what I want her to learn? Like, what kind of mom do I want to be?
Totally.
So it was a lot of eye opening things happening for me and just kind of finding myself again too. So it was like the first step for me to, start figuring out what I wanted and what kind of life I want to live. And when everything shut down, I kind of went into that fear that I've been programmed to believe and
Yes.
follow. And I always had a weird feeling about things too. Like you said, we kind of learn to ignore our intuition and then we're just kind of, oh no, it's just whatever. And then
It
we
is.
ignore it until we can't ignore it anymore. We're like, okay, like this is weird. And then you start questioning. And then I've always
People get
been
mad.
person that I want to learn the other side to see like, is there truth to that?
Yeah.
And that's why I
Totally.
started exploring, what the crazy people were talking about.
You're like, okay, I got a tiny tin hat. It's not like a full blown, it's just like a tiny, I'm just going to put it on. I just want to see what they're saying. And
I'm
you're like,
just,
oh, and over time,
yeah,
you're like, here's my crown of tin. Like, that's what
right.
it is. Like,
Like, I was just curious, like, these people
yeah,
are going off about, they're supporting Trump, like, and all these things. And I'm like, I just want to see what they have to say, what their experiences are. And I remember it was a specific influencer that I was like, part of me was like, I just want to unfollow her. And
yeah,
then part of me couldn't because I was like, she's talking about health stuff. And I'm like, maybe there are some things that like I don't need to agree with everything that she's saying, but like
totally.
I want to go into and see what they're talking about. Because if you're just stuck in your narrow point of view, then you're never going to grow.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what opened it up for me. And then from there, right? Once you open that door, you don't come back.
Once you go down the rabbit hole, you take the pill. Like, and the crazy thing is when people joked about the Matrix, the movie being a documentary, I was like, ha ha ha. And then now I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, it's kind of and we said in the last show, right? If you think about like their said religion or cult or whatever the fuck you want to call that whole Holly
Mm-hmm.
weird
Mm-hmm.
part, is that like they have to show us supposedly what they're doing, and they don't do that through movies, and they do that through, like humiliation and the celebrities we just talked about in the last episode. And you kind of think about that and you're like, okay, well, okay, maybe the Matrix was them being like, this is legit. Either you stay plugged in and you stay ignorant to absolutely everything. What's in front of you is it. You're going to be born, you live, you do shit, you die. And that's, your 3D level. That's it, you know,
Yeah.
or you jump in and see what like is above that and outside of the consciousness. And I think that was such a metaphoric thing. I don't think I understood then. And I'm like, ooh, ooh. But equally so, there's like, you get red pilled, but then you get caught up in that as well, where it's like it's taken too far. Like everything is a psyop, and everyone is and it's just like we got
Gotcha.
to chill a little bit. Like there is stuff, but like calling out everything all day is exhausting to you. You
Yeah.
kind of have to just let it go at some point. But it's more like, okay, I know this about Hollywood, so I'm not going out of my way to support them extra, but it's going to take me time to let go of some of the stuff from the past. I think we talked about like, I don't want to let go of Halloween, but that is something I do think I'm going to let go of just based on how my spirituality has grown, but I'm not quite ready.
Yeah, yeah, and I totally get it. Like that was me last year. I was like, this feels weird, but like there's parts of it that you're still emotionally attached to it,
Yes.
to the experience, right? And like it's kind of you kind of have to go on your own journey of your values and how strong because one thing is knowing and one thing is actually practicing it. Like it's totally
Totally. Yeah.
you could know something, but to actually like be able to practice it and be like, I feel confident in this and I don't
Yes.
care what happens, but this is how I feel, and I'm sticking to my morals or
Yep.
values. That's where the work is, right? And the practice is like
Yeah.
it's tricky, and
It
we're
is because we've been programmed to the other way, whether that's pharmaceuticals or politics or government or just like gender roles or how things should be. And like, and I think it's great that we're trying to like work through and some of these constructs and these systems that have really held people back. But in the same sense, then there's this kind of like all over the place where it's a little too much that we're how do we know that some of these effects are going to be good or bad? Like we talked about in the kids with drag show, like we know sexualization at a young age is damaging. So who's to say that this isn't going to be? And that's where I worry, like when we're talking about today, when you think about like Disney, because that's the big one. And I
how
don't
much
think
are we actually talking about, right?
yeah, exactly. And like, I don't think people, I think it was Out of the Shadows, the documentary that they said, they thought it was really funny how people said, oh, I don't listen to the news and I stay away from mainstream media, but then they had nothing but Disney and that's all they watch. And it's like, it's kind of ignorant to say that they don't have their own narrative and that you wouldn't be programmed intentionally or not intentionally
Mm-hmm.
by those. And as someone who grew up on Disney, I feel like I grew up with an unrealistic expectation for a lot of shit. And our parents had no awareness to that. And we didn't figure it out until we're adults. Most of us being parents is when we're figuring it out and we're like, oh shit, is this from that? But it's crazy to talk about. But you're like, okay, well, why was I always searching for that perfect life? And the one that I had wasn't good enough? Or why was I always looking to be the beautiful, perfect princess when like I don't want to be? Like I like going to the gym and being gross and sweaty and like getting my hands dirty. And then I also like to, and I think that fucked us up a bit.
Oh yeah, like I definitely had a moment coming out of a relationship and having to find myself again and learn, to love myself and what do I want like and I'm like I didn't even grow up with Disney that much. I grew up in Brazil, so it wasn't like as intense as here in North America, but it was all around because
Yeah.
like society is just it's following the same narratives, right? Like it's not just Disney, like Disney is one big part of it, but it's like those same beliefs that Disney is like putting into our mind
Pushing.
is
Yeah.
it's like coming with society and with other movies and with people and with you know
Universities.
yeah, right. So I didn't grow up as much wanting to be a princess and all that stuff, but I still noticed in my adult life that you're like taught that somebody's gonna come and save you, and like the goal is to get married and then you live happily ever after.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what you're taught. So you're like set up, you're not only
Searching for that.
vulnerable. Sorry?
Searching for that. You're like searching for that. And if that's not it, then you're like, this isn't it. And it's like, okay, but
And you're not taught to be like, what do I actually want?
yes.
What are the qualities in a person that I want? Like, who am I? Like, am I happy with myself? Because I really do believe you can't love somebody else if you don't love yourself. And
Totally.
like, do I just want this person to fill the void because I don't know how to take care of myself?
Yeah.
Like, all these things that we are, I think unconsciously taught through those movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then we end up, like out of our relationship, we're like, what was that? Like, like how did I get here?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And if
our,
you don't know who you are and you're then trying to be this other story or other narrative because that's what's being sold, white picket fence and you get married, you have kids and the guy goes off to the work and it's very old stories, but that's what all of these things, like I said, it's not just Disney, it's everywhere. It's news, it's this story of that. And the family unit is great. I'm not saying that, but it's a very easy way to direct people on how things should be. And that's how it was. And now you see it like directing another way, and it's just like, oh God, here we go. Here
yeah, and
we
how it's
go.
presented, right? And the thing,
Yes.
like, I have an issue with is like, when we're young, like up to 7 years old, is when we develop our core beliefs, and
Mhm.
that's what Disney is targeting, right? Like, that's
Definitely.
the main thing. It's like
Yeah.
let's get these kids to think these things because then you have customers for life that think they're not
Yes.
worthy, that are consuming the products, that are, thinking they're only beautiful if they wear this dress and do their hair. That's where their worth comes from.
Yeah,
and you create a
absolutely.
society of unhappy people that don't even know their value.
Yeah.
So that's the best way to control people and to influence them with your products. So
Yes.
that's what I think is so harmful, because if you're not aware, you're just like going with the flow and you're living that life, going through the motions, paying bills, buying material things to try to find happiness, and you end up in a, you have a house, you have a family, and you're unhappy, and you're like, how did I get here? Like, I did
Totally.
not sign up for this.
I did all the things that the fucking Disney movie said for me to do. Where are my animals cleaning my house? They
Yeah.
actually make more mess than they clean, so that was a lie. And I do have a Prince Charming for sure, but I mean, he doesn't ride a horse, and like, I still have to clean up after him and after his socks and shit like that. So, Prince Charming, I don't know, just kidding. But it sets up unrealistic relationship standards, self standards, just and I think it's great to have imagination, and I think it's really good to
Mm-hmm.
show all different things in life, and like to show kids situations and how to handle it. I think that is a really good way to teach kids, like there is value in that because they're seeing it, they're hearing it, like they're engaged, and I think that's great. But just like all good things, bad people get involved, whether that's intentional or not, on whatever side you believe, it's still there. And the fact that it doesn't change when it's like known, and they know what they're doing. They have psychologists on their fucking board. Are you kidding me? They have people at Disneyland doing
Mm-hmm.
stuff to psychologically make you spend more money by putting smell things. We've talked about this before, putting like scents by the food, and they waft in like that vanilla ice cream, and you're like hot, and they make it hotter so that you're drinking more water, and they move stuff so that you end up walking all the way over here past all of these stores with your kids to get the food. Like, they know this shit. So don't tell me that they're not doing that in these fucking shows. Like, you would be stupid to not, like,
Think
in
it's
that sense.
like, oh, they're so innocent, like they probably didn't mean it that way. Like, that's very, you're obviously not awake if you're not realizing the issues with,
Mhm.
those beliefs that you're putting into your kids. Like, if you, that's where I think parents need to be more aware and informed and
Totally.
intentional on how they're parenting, because if you're not teaching them the beliefs that you want them to know and have as an adult, someone else is. And if they're
And they're
watching,
very impressionable, right?
yeah.
And that's what worries me with people. And we're going to go into this more in another episode too, is like online things that I don't think parents are too busy, and understandably so, because you need to do like 5 fucking jobs to live now. So like, I get it. I'm not by any means shaming, but like for me, I would have no idea unless I dived into that there are predators online that act like children, that
Mm.
talk to your kids, that groom your kids this way. I'm not trying to be a psychopath, but it's fucking true. There's pedophiles everywhere, and they're gross, and they go onto these games. I can't remember which one it was, Hugsy or something like that. I don't know. It was
I
like
know
this.
Roblox too is one of the ones.
Yes, that one. And there's
Yeah.
like this like bad teddy bear or something, and it was like talking about killing their parents or something, and it was like this really, and it wasn't the people that created it, but it was somebody else online with bad intentions that made it look exactly like, and these kids are finding it because it's in the algorithm, and it's this fucking Hugsy or whatever, and it's your parent, you don't know, like that's 3 minutes that you're not paying attention to your child. Not
We didn't grow
shaming.
up with those games, right?
We
Like,
didn't.
we didn't grow up with the access that these kids have. And
Yep.
I'm so into that stuff too, and learning about that, because I don't think kids need to be in that. Like, and even with the shows they watch, like that's the
Yep.
first step, like the shows. But if they're having like full access to other people, then that's a whole different level too.
Yep. And that's what YouTube is scary, right? Like you not, there's stuff that gets deleted. We all know this, but there's a lot that's not, that should be. That's why it makes you question some things, and your kids can just accidentally stumble. We've all stumbled across stuff. We're like, whoa, this isn't fucking, whoa, I didn't look for this. How did I get to this like nearly pornographic
Mm-hmm.
short that has nothing to do with what I've searched, right? And it's like, it's scary. And when I grew up, like I didn't have the internet. Just as I was leaving, my parents got the, oh my God, that made me sound so old. I was leaving my house when my parents got the internet, and my parents had no idea. And my brother was just coming, of age when the internet was big, and he stumbled on really weird spots of the internet because how the fuck would our parents know that? Like, we didn't even know the ones that were like, it just happened, and he was so young. And you can see this last generation, next one, no offense, guys, but everyone needs to be online and validate. I sucker for it too, don't get me wrong. But we got all these TikTok stars and all this where we're looking to do that. And it's just getting so much further and further away from real life and your soul and like purpose. And it's just making me sad because it's deteriorating these kids. And I'm watching it because I was the last generation that didn't have this shit. Like
Mm-hmm.
MySpace was just like coming out, and that was like huge. And it was like graduated and then Facebook the year after. So I grew up with no social media, and I feel very friggin' blessed for that. And that I only had to deal with much music and like the handful of channels that I had access to. Now kids have access on their phones, and everybody's wearing a filter, and everyone's this fake made up life. And these kids now are growing up with that, and they have access to it. And I just think that's scary as fuck.
It's killing our kids, like the just the eating disorders, because
Yep.
12-year-olds, like I know people that have kids and their 12-year-olds have eating disorders just from like Instagram and that stuff, and just comparing themselves. And then so like it's way worse than just Disney. Like
Oh,
before
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
we
That's
had
just
the
step one.
beliefs, right now they have like access to all these inappropriate things that's just taking their innocence away. That's why I'm super like intentional, and we need to protect our kids
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
the harmful beliefs that they're learning, like that they need to please people and they need to be nice and they cannot stand up for their feelings, because that's being too aggressive as a woman.
Yeah.
And then men can get away with whatever like they want,
Yeah.
and they can be aggressive, they can be dismissive, they can just not try,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still saving us. Like all these that we learn in our generation,
Yep.
that now we're like unpacking and
Yeah.
healing.
Hold on. Hold on. Are we still doing this? Like, we know, and that's where I do love where it's good that we're having those conversations about like gender constructs and being like, on the movies, it was like the men went to work and they're the saviors and they're the big, strong. And then the women's were like, ooh, dainty, have kids, wife, and I'm glad that we're getting away from that. But now I also feel like it's gone too far by them trying to do too much, where it's like, can
Yeah.
we just bring it back to basics? Can we just teach kids in these shows and this stuff fundamental things like being nice, but do we have to have sex involved in that? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, can it just be about being nice to humanity? Do we have to make everything so like politically, racially, gender forward, or can it just be like breaking it down at a kid level of humanity, instead of like having all these big conversations as like, if that's not your kid, I just don't think that's a place that you need to have it. So why would Disney and all that kind of stuff be, okay to do that? And like you said, we're unpacking so much from our childhood and looking at it, we're pinpointing where this stuff is coming because it didn't come from inside. It had to have come somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, that was big for us. And like those teen bot magazines, like all the comparing that they did. Now these kids have it on a fucking device in their hand all day, and
Yeah.
parents are too busy because they have to. You have to survive in this fucking inflation, and they're just getting absorbed and listening. Oh, you should get Botox at 20 years old. You should be like on birth control to regulate yourself, and it's safe and effective. And like you're not cool unless you have this kind of style. Like we went through it, but these kids are going through it at like times 1,000.
Yeah, like a way different speed and access to things that like we would never have had access to it at our age. Like I was literally still playing with baby dolls at 12.
Yes,
Like, and
totally.
now you have 12-year-olds
On fucking
dancing
TikTok.
and like showing half of their bodies and like wearing makeup, comparing themselves to other girls. Like they're kids, like they're
Yep.
literally kids. They
Yep.
should just be playing, and like they should know that they're worthy, that it doesn't matter how they look and how they do their hair, that they have worth, they have purpose.
Yep.
And it worries me a lot, especially having a girl. Those are things I am
Totally.
very like passionate about. And even it's kids are so impressionable that like even as a parent, like if you walk away from them, they might perceive that as you not caring. So it doesn't take much to literally create a core belief in their minds.
Yeah.
So as a parent, you really need to be intentional, and and not just project your stuff on them. Like, that's why I have been so intentional on my healing, because of my daughter. Like, she literally changed my
Totally.
life, and it's changing and helping me heal myself.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, I don't want to
It's
get
it's
emotional here, because yeah.
But it's so beautiful though that you were able to do that. And it sucks that we as a society don't feel empowered to just do that for ourselves. And the majority of the time we're doing it because we don't want other people to see it. Like we don't want to see us hurt other people, right? You're going to do that for your daughter because you don't want her to look up at you and you'll be like, no, mom, you want her to be proud and like the people around, right? I think that's like such a beautiful thing that you just want more for her. And I think you definitely is fair to be scared, but you alone having that awareness is going to set her up so much more successfully because we can't stop what's really happening out there. All we can do is help what's in here. And by you teaching her that, yo, this is fake. This is not how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And reiterating that for the next
Directing
5,
them,
10 years.
right?
Yeah, she's going to be like, oh, no, this is not real life. This is fake. This is photoshopped. I could have this if I had the money and da da da, but that's not real. That's not what real life is about. And I think that's going to be so huge because our parents weren't aware of that. And that's understandable. How would they? It's new. Their parents didn't go through it. So how would they have known? Right. So all we can do is do better for the next generation by learning and admitting, hey, maybe those rag magazines aren't the best idea. Like, maybe we shouldn't be comparing bodies, like that way, you know,
Yeah.
that content should be literally adults only, now like Kanye West said this, the greatest, I don't know when he said it, but he was like, when I was growing up, you had to go to like adult section. You had to go to a like private section. There's usually someone there watching. You couldn't see any of that like sexual content. And now it's literally on a child, like y'all, sorry, people get mad at me, but TikTok is a child platform.
And
So
Snapchat.
and Snapchat. So like I have Snapchat for like recording my own videos, but I never post on it because I'm just like it just, especially because of the whole mask thing. I'm like, you guys put masks on there 2 years before masks came out because you made people start to think that masks were okay. And it
Programming.
was just what we're talking about. Hey, everywhere, not just Disney. But I was like, fuck this app. No. And like TikTok, it's making people have the attention span of 60 seconds of information. No one will,
And they know what they're doing.
and don't tell me that they don't and that they're not trying to dumb people down and get them hooked and depressed. It's just another fucking way to get people to spend money, to feel like they're superior. Like you said, like, oh, you're not good enough unless you look like this. So women do plastic surgery, put tons of makeup on, buy all these fancy clothes and jewelries and exterior things to what?
Mm-hmm.
What exactly? When you die, is that really, no matter what you believe in, is your final thing? Is that going to matter?
Right?
I
Yeah.
don't think
Just
so.
creating that cycle of like emptiness in our society.
Mhm.
And we've
Totally.
seen that in the pandemic, like, the suicides, everything has gone up. And in kids, like, like, I feel like what makes me more upset is how we're destroying our youth and our kids, because this stuff is hard for adults, like Instagram, Facebook, like that stuff gives you anxiety. Like, I even struggle with that because you're on there and you're connecting with people, and it's so stimulating, and you can
Mhm.
never, like, it's, you never run out of information. Like, you'll be
Nope.
on there forever,
Yeah.
right? So they know what they're doing. And even with the TikTok, like, I don't have TikTok or Snapchat, but in China, apparently the kids, they're getting shown like math problems, like, piano instrument stuff, like actual things that
Inspiring.
the
Yeah.
kids, they're like smart because they'll be the next scientists and all that, those things. And here it's like these little dances and like these pranks, like, it comes off as like, oh, this is fun, but it's like so deceiving, right? Because you're like,
Keep
oh
your youth.
my
Be
God,
fun.
yeah, when you actually, if you're going through the motions, you don't see the issue with it. But if you're actually intentional, you're like, what are we teaching our youth? You
And
know?
what's the purpose of it? Like, okay, having fun. Sure, of course, we all have fun. I am one to do it. I've recorded, like, try to inspire people to get up and move and like have fun. I get dances, artistry for sure. But these kids are literally putting their worth in that this is going to make them money. And if all of these people jump on these platforms like this to just make money, and then all of a sudden, let's just say for some weird reason, like, Russia finally like hacks, and has an invasion of some sort, like they keep promising us here. And they cut that all down, who are you? Who are you if the social media drops, if the internet just ceased to exist? Who are you? Can you take care of yourself? Can
Mm-hmm.
you fend for yourself? Can you cook yourself food? Can you do any of those things? Or are you just now plugged into a society that does everything for you so you don't have to? So, and I think we've seen that with the pandemic when they start taking abilities away from you, you start being programmed to being like, it's okay. And we've seen that with masks. Like I said, it started on Snapchat a couple of years. Fine, whatever, no big deal. And then people said,
Yeah.
well, they do that over in China. Sure, sure, sure. This is Canada. And then it started coming into the point where you were a grandmother killer if you didn't wear one. I don't think people came to that overnight. That slowly got programmed into our minds by different ways of being like, this is normal. This is normal. Just like, heart attacks in children. We won't go there. But like you think about this and it's like, if you don't realize, like I've mentioned this a few times in the show, during the height of the pandemic, when we were not really allowed to travel province to province, I remember seeing someone with Saskatchewan plates and being like, the fuck are you doing in my province? I don't care. I didn't care at all what people did during the pandemic. But in the back of my mind, like I was mad at this person. And I think that was my first indication to be like, okay, maybe it's not even just Hollywood that's programming us. It's the news and all of these things. And that's where I started thinking, okay, I'm absorbing information and I'm acting outside of my true beliefs. What the fuck is that? And then I learned about subconscious.
Yeah, 95% of what we do is subconscious. Like, right? We just kind of go through the motions on these beliefs that we're not even aware we have. So
Isn't
that's
that
kind of
fuck?
scary,
You're
right?
like, oh, this is the rabbit hole I need to go down because this is going to make my life better.
Yeah, that's a deep one, and it feels like it's a lifelong one
It
too.
is. It is. It's just when you get to the next level, they're like, oh, you are not enlightened at all. Here's the next level for you. Like, you think that you were checked, but oh, your ego is still over here in this part, and we're going to remind you right now.
Yes, and like in the last couple of years, that's kind of been the journey I've been on. And it makes me really aware as a mom too of like, what is my daughter, what programming am I doing? Because we as parents do programming too, right?
Totally. Absolutely.
Like, like one of the sentences that I don't like is like, be a good girl, or, like drives me nuts and stuff like that that parents say to kids all the time, and it's not with a bad intention, like, or good job, or these repetitive things that we're just like, what are we teaching them, like, can we just be a little more intentional and be like, what are we teaching them?
Totally.
I recently put my daughter in ballet classes, and I'm very excited. It's cute, it's super adorable, and I'm very like aware of being like, how did you feel after? Did you have fun?
Yep.
Not just like, you're beautiful and just focusing on your looks, because like she's way more than that.
Or like, how'd you place? Like, how are things going? Are you understanding? We put so much on kids when it comes to performance because I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that for some parents, I mean, I'm not one and I don't do this to my cats, but it's like they can kind of live the dream that maybe you didn't. Or really, like, I know my mom always just tried to give me advice so that I didn't have to go through what she went through. But in her anxiety and scared and not being able to tell me properly, it came off as like bossy and like condescending when she was really trying to be like, oh, but baby, I've done this before and it sucks, but she was so young and she was like, don't fucking do this. And you're like,
And you're like, you don't trust me, I'm not good enough, and you're
it's like,
having, yeah,
yeah.
I'm
And
never
it's
good enough for you, and
Yeah, and it's good to have all those things. I think competition and sports and all of that stuff is really great. But the reason why it's great is because there's teachable real life moments. And if you're not intentionally walking them through those things, I'm not saying blocking them, do not block them from these experiences. It's teaching them how to regulate that when they come up to it. So they don't come up as fucking entitled adults that want participation trophies. We all work with one. We all work with that person that thinks that they should just sit there and exist and not get paid and not, that is what you're creating when you're not being focused on your kids. And I'm not saying that's always intentional. I had a single mother. She had no time. She had no time to take care of herself, let alone me. And then now as adults, we're going through it together and we're learning and hopefully
yeah,
teaching the next generation, right? That there's no need to be angry. There's no, and moms, watching this, please do not go back to do your fucking mom guilt thing, okay? You cannot take this episode and what we're saying to be like, oh, well, on the Be Real Babe podcast, so I'm going to mom guilt myself. No.
Yeah.
What we're saying is if
Yeah.
something's not aligning or you feel like weird or, you know, you're not sure, it's a good idea to get involved. And I think don't worry about being like that crunchy mom or that overprotective mom. You have to be. Before you didn't
Yeah.
have to be because they were in the comfort of your own home and you had no outside sources besides the friends in the family that you brought around or people you seen at church or the grocery store or at school. Now, so many people, including strangers, have access to your children. And like you said, if you're not teaching them, somebody is, and they're absorbent as fuck. So intentional or not, being very aware of these things, I think are important personally.
Yes, and like that's another thing, like, you know, before, like now that I'm in this like different awareness, I'm like, now I get people that wouldn't let their kids watch things, and I'd be like, that's so extreme, like that's not harmful. And like you're like, oh my gosh, like I have become that person.
I'm talking about politics and not letting my kids watch stuff. Oh my God, am I aging? This is 30s,
Like,
isn't it? I knew it. I knew it was
you're like,
coming.
those people knew what they were talking about.
Fuck.
That music causing violence, causing sexualized ideas, the TV shows causing kids to really like just think they need to be pretty, and then causing, you know, issues with body image and relationship issues. I'm like, they knew what they were talking about, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm that mom, but like,
Yeah. You know what it feels like to be screaming and you're like, oh shit, this is what they were screaming about all that long ago. Oh
right.
my God.
And it's like, you know, the status quo, to just go with the flow. And we saw that in the last 2 years, right? Like, who are you to have a different idea and not want to put something on your body that you don't want to put on your body? Like, that's
Yep.
insane. Just put it on your body. Like, and you're
Sure.
like, really? Like, I want to teach my daughter consent. So how can I teach her to say no to something to her body if I am not saying no to something to my body? Like, that's
100%.
not adding up, you know? So that's where we were talking about like aligning with our values, like our actions.
Totally. Yep.
And that kind of is the journey, I think, of, you know, having my daughter, you know, we co-parents, so she goes back and forth. I don't control what happens there, but I can only control what happens in my house. And, you know, she can watch things there. And then when she comes here, I'm like a little more, you know, selective on what she can watch. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, am I being too harsh? And I'm like, you know what? Like, no, like I'm just sticking to my values, and I'm just sticking to what I think will harm her less. Like, you know,
Totally.
and as a parent, you gotta pick your battles. Like, you know,
Yes.
some days it's watching TV, and that's fine because you're picking your battles. You try to have the least worst harmful thing.
Absolutely. And it's okay if you're wrong. Like, holy shit. You know, like nobody comes with a marriage handbook. Kids don't come with handbooks. Every generation, every location, every gender, every family unit is going to have such, and I think that's why it's so important to not shame and judge as opposed to share and be open and being like, I don't know, I fucked up, or I think I might have fucked up. I don't know. Let's talk through this. Like, am I being crazy? Like, what do you see? And if we could just take that away, we would learn so much more and we would gain personal experience. And I think that would drive so much more
Understand.
confidence and community, and not so much fear and division and like, oh, that family's doing it different, so they must hate me because they're doing it different. No, they might not even know what you're doing exists, right? Like, and tell them. And if it's not, okay, cool. We can still, maybe, like you said, I don't have to relate in everything that someone says. I can take value in that topic and what they said and leave it at that. I'm not making this person my God. I'm not making them the be all end all. I'm taking value in this lesson or moment that they're sharing. I don't understand why we have to cancel people unless they're continually being fuck bags. Like, but no, Disney can do this stuff and like, you know what I mean? But we'll cancel and just,
One big word that like I've had to learn in the last 2 years is like discernment. Being able to, you know, because a lot of things come at you and they look so fun and playful and shiny, and like, you know, a Disney movie, they put these ideas in our minds in a fun way, and that's attractive, and you're like, oh, cool, like let's watch this movie, and
So
you're
cute.
yeah, right, and you're not even realizing what the message is and what is this teaching us, like, is that something that I want my daughter to learn, and even like asking questions like, hey, they did that, but that's not very nice, like, sometimes kids they're going to learn at school, they're going to learn other things, so you can't fully protect
Totally.
them from it all,
No.
but being intentional and always having that connection, so that you're teaching them the values that will benefit them in the
Yeah,
end.
absolutely. Allowing them to grow up and be in a safe space to ask the questions and ask
Mhm.
back, well, why? I hate that one and I get it. I don't have kids, so I can imagine the why this, why
Yeah.
that, why this. I understand it's annoying, but those are fucking incredible moments, in my opinion, to
Hmm.
be teaching kids that it is good to be questioning stuff. It is good to be curious. It's good because then they're using their critical thinking and their discernment to be like, okay,
Hmm.
well, I knew this information and now mom's telling me this, but this doesn't correlate. Why?
Hmm.
But
Exactly.
instead of being like, oh, don't ask, stop asking because it is. Well, guess what? That grows up to a bunch of people being like, well, I did it because I was told to and it was my job. And look where that in history has gotten anybody fucking anywhere,
Yeah.
right? So this, in my opinion, at that young age, in those moments of curiosity, is where you're going to allow them safe space to ask the questions, instead of just being like, no, you can't, because then that raises adults that are afraid to question narratives, to question science, to question what they've been given, right? Like
Hmm.
in my mind. And it's just curious little kids. They need to know. And you can't shield them for good or bad because guess what? Then they'll go in the adult world and they won't know how to fucking regulate. And all of us are like, okay, please stop and go back and parent yourself as a 15-year
Yeah.
old if you're acting 5. Like,
Yes, I love one of the things about parenting. It's challenging, but I love giving her the skills that she would need, that I'm learning now, as
totally.
I'm healing, I'm learning the skills and then giving them to her and explaining things to her, it's like, why can't I have a cookie right now? And like explaining to her, your stomach needs food that will help your body and stuff like that,
Not just
not,
no, it's got to wait for dinner. Well, why? Tell them
yeah.
why. Because dinner's going to be better for you. It's going to make you stronger and smarter. And then after that, you can have your treat.
Yeah, like in general, like there's, it is overwhelming. There are so many different things about it. Like there's the whole, you're constantly like trying to control what damage you can, because you can't
That's fair.
avoid, right? Like
No, you can't.
childhood, like, and it's not even like if something major happens, like if a kid perceives something,
Yeah,
that's the way that they perceive it is how they're gonna internalize it. So, two kids can watch the same movie and one just like doesn't even get affected by whatever is being like programmed into them, but the other one is like, oh, I gotta do this to be this, right? So
totally.
I
Absolutely.
feel like parents really need to be connected to their kids. Like the connection, I think, is the key that we're
Mhm.
missing a lot in this world now. To be
Well, it's
connected.
easy because everyone's made everything so easy and just like no one wants to do the hard way because there's an easier way to do it. Even if there might be harms or risks, there's easier ways and more convenient, cheaper, whatever, or because you have to, like, and I totally understand that. I'm not a parent, but like even when talking in our last one about homeschooling, sometimes you just have to make some really shitty sacrifices and be uncomfortable to align with your morals. If you don't want your child in school, and you have to have a job, we know women that have then, and I'm not saying this is a lot, but they went to work at nighttime so that they could homeschool during the day and work with their spouses. Sometimes it's just having to do those things that are super uncomfortable, being that parent that's not always, because like when you think about movies and you think about all that too, like if you really think about it, taking time, you take time to go and watch it out of your life, then you're buying nothing. There's never healthy snacks. It's always, and I eat it all, don't fucking get me wrong, I'm a stoner, I eat it all, I get it, but then it's just all sugary stuff, so we're like overstimulating, filling our bodies with shit. Then we come out feeling like we've compared ourselves and we're not as much as whatever we've seen. And then now we're eating stuff and now it feels gross and now we're sick. And like, then we're just living in this like low vibe. And if that's what this industry is doing, then back the fuck away from it. Like, if you can't just see it as entertainment and take the fun out of it and it's disrupting you that much, I think we need to stay away from that kind of lifestyle, like It's
Mm-hmm.
nuts. People just put their identity in these external things like Star Wars or something. And it's like, I'm so obsessed with Star Wars. And it's like, okay, cool. No, that's like totally fine. Be yourself. But then there's got to be a degree where you're, not just Star Wars. You're an act like, okay, cool. Are
Like
you like,
real
what
life,
else?
like
Yeah.
what,
What's real life?
right?
Tell me
Like,
more.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
What do you do?
place, right? Like, having a movie night, but like if you're doing that all the time, I was never a big TV person. I literally like watch one show, and like if I have time, I usually record it, and it's like my garbage reality TV show that I
You
watch,
got to have it. You
and
got
it's
to
like
have it.
take a break. And
Yeah.
sometimes I like go through the weeks and I'm like, oh, I haven't watched in a while, but I'm not a big TV person, so that's kind of where my values are and my morals are. Like, I'd rather be connecting with my daughter and having those moments being present and, not just being like going through the motions and just being distracted, really. Being
Yeah. Oh,
distracted.
totally. Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's a time and a place. Like, oh, there's a birthday at a movie theater, like you go, but being able to, get away from that and be like, okay, but this is real life. We don't do that all the time. Like,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it gets addicting and
Yes.
it creates that addiction. Like, they can't control that because they're kids. They're still like, they have no self control. So
Yeah.
if it's fun and it's stimulating, they want it over and over and over. So as parents, I think we're responsible to protect them from that
Yes.
addiction, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then too, like I said, it's always like not always the best choices. Like you're going there, it's not like they're like, here's some apples and carrots and some water. It's like, here's some M&Ms and I love it. I eat it too. But then I'm always like, wow, like I think if I became a parent, those are things I'd be thinking, okay, do I really want to stuff my kid with all of this sugar? And like if you think like and I talk about Halloween, it's not even just a spiritual. I really struggled this year buying candy to hand it out because I'm like,
Because
everyone gets
you
yeah, I just
what
know. And it's like,
it,
I don't want to be that house, but I also, because like kids, like parents get to decide for their kids what they eat. And I'm not going to control that. But I'm like, but I'm also then taking a part of it. And does this really align? Like, I love kids coming over, but it's like, if I handed out apples, they probably wouldn't like that. But that would be more aligned to what I'd want to do? So I thought next year I want to hand out like toys or something that like from like a 3-year-old to like a 12-year-old could have that's like kind of like Halloween that's not sugar. And I'm not shading. It's just, I just think some of these things happen in mass. Like if you think about summertime, it's just nonstop summertime, camping, candy, chips, da 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 da. And again, you can control that, but it's very heavy focused. And then you go into the beginning of school and it's all this new school stuff. And then it's Halloween. And then Thanksgiving. And then it's Halloween. And then
yeah,
it's like, you're getting ready for Christmas for 6 weeks. It's like Christmas, and then it's New Year's, and then through this whole time it's winter, and everyone's sick. Everyone's so sick right now, and it's like,
right,
yeah, because we're eating sugar
right, trash.
and having the crash. Like, oh, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
judging because I do it, but like, I'm just saying, being aware of it. Everyone's like blaming kids for being cranky, and I'm like, okay, but like, if I get stuffed
Have
with
you
sugar,
looked at ingredients?
and like those things are led to like, do we all have mental illness or are we all just overstimulated, y'all? Like,
Yes, I love learning about that too.
I'm just curious. Like, it's easy for Big Pharma to say everyone has anxiety. Here's a medication. It's a lot harder of being like, why are we all acting like this? Something changed in the last 10 to 12 years. I wonder what that is.
Yeah, all you gotta do is remove processed foods from your diet for 30 days and you'll see how calm your mind gets.
But no one wants to talk about that because you get like that like dip of like, oh, I get to have that good food or whatever. And so that overrides that. But no one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about like what you're doing to your stomach and what that's leading to and even everything else. Like it's not healthy to be on social media comparing yourself. And whether you want to or not, by nature, we're programmed to do that just generationally, because our ancestors got kicked out of the tribe if they weren't cool and they died. And so that back in the day, now you don't die if you're canceled for the most part, but it's still in that thought process. If I don't show up and I'm going to get canceled and I'm by myself and I'm alone and no one's going to like me. And that's, I think, why we all still subscribe to all of these things, because we don't want to be that crunchy mom or that extreme mom or that da da da. And I think that's just like, we need to get rid of that and just be like, what feels good to you? If
Yeah.
Disney feels good and you feel like it's giving good lessons and you don't see any negative effects, that's fine. That's your life and your decision. But if you can look at your life and your issues and maybe relate that back to some of the things in your childhood, I think by doing that, it helps you be aware of what could be happening to your children in this day and age, in this lifetime.
And just be more intentional. Like, what is this actually teaching? Like, just, getting curious. Like, getting curious about what are you teaching them? Because it's just easy to sit and just be distracted and just go with the flow. But when you're actually wanting to be intentional and teach values, like, what foundation are we setting up for our kids? Like, that's where I think because when push comes to shove, they're going to go to school. And when some girl is saying, hey, you don't look like this, if they've been taught to compare themselves and that their worth is how they look, they're going to be affected. But if they haven't, they're
Totally.
like, okay, whatever. Like, that's
Yeah.
just your opinion. It has
Yeah,
nothing to do,
absolutely. And you
right?
were taught to question, like, okay, she's saying that. I don't feel that way. I'm going to like not take this as face value. But if you're not
Mm-hmm.
ever thought of that, then it's just like, oh, she's right. She's right because I'm going to assume she's right because we're terrible at that. We all do it too, right? And it's so
Yeah.
sad and I hate it. And I just feel like our parents, I think to a degree, didn't realize that how their lives and what they did affected us. And I think it's really cool as a generation that we're seeing the impact and trying to be like, okay, hold on. One side didn't care about feelings, and then the next one went too much feelings.
The other
So
extreme.
let's find a balance. And I think that's where we're at, and we're that generation that was like, we had the parents that didn't get to be cared about mentally. And then now as we grew up, we're watching the next generation care too much about emotion and feelings to the point where it's an identity and a crisis if anything is rocked by that. So it's like now I think our generation, like kind of in the middle, are like, okay, next gen, let's kind of find this balance, right? Where it's important to be activists and it's important to speak out and use your voice and not be afraid. But there's a difference when things are a little bit extreme and you can kind of tell that it's out of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not like privilege, not privilege, but just like entitlement, out of entitlement, as opposed to like what you truly feel. Or is it just cool? I find like a lot of stuff now, it's like, it's just, I'm talking about this because it's cool right now and it's, important right now, but I'm going to flip to something else. That's when you kind of just know you're not attached to your soul. When you're
Yeah.
looking at everything else as your identity and you can't actually say who you are, what you're doing. And you're just like, oh, this is my job. This is how much I make. This is what but who I am. I think that's a question to be like, are you living externally in this matrix or are you doing what's best for you in your soul? Because I think a lot of us don't, and that's how we develop these mental illnesses, and then it turns into physical illnesses because we're not living in alignment, whether that's your food, like we talk about this all the time, like it's everywhere, right? It's not just the
Yeah.
things that we're watching and we're consuming, it's in our food and it's how we're eating, and it's, are we sleeping, are we
Yeah.
turning our brain off, are we breathing, like
Yeah.
everyone just take a second and lower
Most
their shoulders. Like, let's all do it together now. Like,
most people are not breathing, like, like, it's crazy, like, once you start learning about how to connect to yourself. And then that's when you get, like, when you're connected to yourself, then what am I projecting, what is triggering me, like my
Yep.
child crying, I'm just gonna put some TV because I can't handle the crying. Or like, can I sit with her and teach her, like, it's okay to be sad, I'm here with you, we'll get through this together. Like, that's the hard work. It's easy to
That is
just
the hard
put
work.
something on and distract, and then we have a society of people like wanting to distract and just
Yeah,
find
it's like, oh, what?
pleasure, right?
Totally. And we're all guilty of it. We know
We
this.
Yeah,
Social media is, and the phones, it's super addicting. And
it
we are
is.
now learning that. All of us, I know in our group of friends, we're doing this goal list where we're actively trying to reduce our time on social media, where it's like we're recording it now because it's like, holy shit, like there's a degree that I'm like, yeah, I need to do this for the podcast. I need to look a little bit. And then all of a sudden I'll be spending an hour and I'm like, okay, bitch, but you didn't do a fucking thing about the podcast. Like you literally, and sometimes you need it. You need your distracting. But if we're starting them now doing that, and we just started doing it as individuals in our 20s, what is that doing
Yeah.
for emotion regulation and understanding and all of that? We're just so instead of just doing drugs and partying, they can do something as innocent as pick up their phone and play a game or do something on there to totally disconnect. And with places like the metaverse, people are going to be able to absolutely leave their lives on planet Earth and live in this fucking fake ass. And that scares me more, I think, than anything. Is
Yes.
this
Like, why go through life struggles and feel sad and feel hurt and feel what, the uncomfortable feelings, if you can just plug into your VR and just live in this make-believe world? Like,
totally?
that's scary, right? Because then you're totally disconnected. You're totally not connected from your purpose. Like, that was not our purpose, to come here and just be distracted for this whole life. Like,
No. And
you know,
if not, your soul's coming back quite a few times. If you don't
yeah,
start paying attention to some of these fucking lessons, you're going to regenerate yourself and you're going to come back here. And when you get to that extra level of consciousness in your life, you're going to be pissed off at all your past lives for not learning these lessons. You're going to come back and learn it. So you might as well learn it now.
yes, this is the
It's
chance.
so funny.
Why I'm like, because they have all these different terms for parenting, and like there's like the gentle parenting, and I'm like, I feel like I'm an intentional parent. Like,
That's a good word. Yeah.
being intentional about, but you gotta do it to, like, with yourself first, before you can't just preach it, right? You gotta kind of
Because
live
they're
it.
watching. They're watching.
Yeah, they're learning more from what you do than what you say.
Totally.
So, and I see it doesn't take long. Like,
No.
3.5 years, like, if you don't have your values and your morals and what you want for your child in order, they're gonna run you over. Sorry.
They're little violent potatoes. They're shifty little
Yeah.
bastards.
Yeah.
But it's true though. And they're mirrors, right? They're baby mirrors. So anything that you haven't dealt with, those kids are going to show you what you need to
Mhm.
work on. Like it's shitty, like in that sense, but that to me is the beauty of life. And then you're teaching them those lessons as you're going through them. And you can either help them and help them make good choices based on your choices, or you can be fucking crazy and go nuts. And that's what they're going to pick up. And it's no one's fault. We all go through it. But that's what kids do. They absorb and they mimic and they copy. And,
And if
you
they're
can't
not copying you, and
they're
like,
copying someone
if
else.
they don't have, yeah, if they don't have you as a reference, like, I feel like a lot of kids have no reference and they're just lost. Like, up is down, down is up. Like, anybody can be anything. It's just, that's scary, because as a child, you need structure, like, you need
Yes.
routine, you need to have a point of reference. And
And boundaries, right? And learning that, like, okay, this is past that point. This is a little too much. This is an extreme, or however you want to look at it. Without that, people again get away with stuff. And it's like, well, I feel this way, so therefore it is. And it's like, not quite. We could say that, oh, so murderers just want to murder, so that it is, so we'll just like let it go. Like, no, obviously there's some fucking boundaries. Like systems need to be worked, but at the end of the day, foundation and community is still needs to have respect. It still needs to have that everyone's different, but we can work together,
yeah,
and that's where I don't love this whole new like telling other parents like, if they are doing like, let's say an extreme by like holding back medications or vaccines or showing them stuff, I just don't think that that's, I couldn't say if that's going to help that kid or not. So why would I say don't do that? Like, oh, that's, like I've been there and I've been that judgmental person. But now that I'm learning this stuff, I'm like, wow, maybe that person knows something about this topic, let's say more than I do. Like at first when people are talking about root canals, I was like, go get fucked. I worked in the dental field for a long time, and not once have I ever heard that root canals are bad. It's always save the tooth, save the tooth, save the tooth. Um, Learning what I learn now, I will get the tooth extracted and I will get a bridge and I will never get a root canal. That's your own choices. But like I was around people that learned that in school. And now that I'm learning it, I'm like, whether all those people in school still think it's good, it doesn't feel right to me. And I'm looking at people's like, real life experiences and they're telling me otherwise. So I'm just going to not. And it's crazy when you go through those and you start seeing all this on a ground level. I couldn't imagine what it would be like for kids. Like, it's like, I just have to deal with it in my life. I'm watching my friends go through that with their kids and like, oh my God, okay, school's coming up. Now we got to deal with bullies or, this and like all these new things. And I'm just like, oh yeah, my cats are like a little fat and we can work on that. But like, I commend you guys so much. Cause like you said, there's so much to look at. There's so much to try to be aware of. And it is a full-time job. Like, and if you're not doing it as a full-time job,
there's so
there's a
much coming.
chance. There's a chance your kids are at risk of becoming somebody else, becoming a part of attached to someone else's ideologies. And that's scary right now.
And we have a small time frame. Like, I have a lot of friends with teenagers and they're 12, 14. Like, I feel like once, if you haven't set the foundation by then, that would be very challenging. Like, once they get older, once, pretty much after the 7-year-old mark where they got their core beliefs, like, that's the formative years. And
Mhm.
that's where you got to develop that connection, and you got to, develop those beliefs like, you are worthy, you are beautiful no matter what, and those
Yeah.
things, that I will love you no matter what you do, and things like that, that they don't have to perform for your love. All these things, I love learning about child psychology because it obviously affects us as adults.
Yes, absolutely. And the fact that you're learning and sharing with other people, right? Because not all of us have time to research. And I think that's why it's so important to have a community that you trust, you know, not saying like leave everything to everybody else, but it's like, I never would have thought about homeschooling until I know friends that started. And now, like you said, up until 7. So I think it would be really cool to homeschool up until that time. And then, maybe introduce a part-time, like, so we don't have kids now. We talked about possibly adopting the next couple of years. And if we do, I said, I would like to start working now so that I can homeschool because my spouse has ADHD. And his mom was a busy nurse. She didn't have time to do that, but school wasn't for him. Like it wasn't a good setting. And so I, knowing that, would love to be in a position which could take
Hmm.
years so that I could do that because I know that my future kid, if we have one, we're going to adopt, but still, like that those are possibilities and I want to set them up with the greatest success possible. And I don't want that to be coming from other people because I grew up
And
with a bunch of different parents and it was really hard to be like, who was right? I went to my grandparents, my dad and his wife, and my mom and her husband. So 3 different ideologies raising me from those formidable years. And everywhere I went had a different rule, had a different way of doing things, would react different. And I would change as a child to show up as a
mhm,
different person depending on what location I was because they were all very different. No one's fault. Everyone loved me, but there
mhm.
was no awareness to that, right? So when I grew up, I was just like constantly like trying to people please a bunch of people because I didn't know who to like, and it's like you don't
Yeah.
think about that at the time, but that did a lot of damage. So how can the stuff that we're consuming and putting in front of our kids all the time with these stories and thoughts, and if we're not being addressing them and bringing them to real life, they could really just take that mind and those thoughts and go wherever they want with it. And it's kind of scary.
Yeah, they can create their own stories, and there's simple things that we can do as parents, just having those conversations and reassuring them, and making sure that if they see something that doesn't go with your values, that you talk to them about it, let them ask questions and be like, hey, why did they say that,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
say, that's not something to say to somebody, it's not very nice,
Yep.
saying that,
Totally.
it hurts their feelings. How would you feel if somebody said it to you? Like, giving them the respect to let them understand at their level, and even like as a parent, learning it's okay to change your mind.
Yes.
Today we watched the movie, but today we're not.
Yep.
Now you can watch this show, or changing your mind, because we're learning as we go too. Like,
Totally.
this is hard.
Yeah, and teaching them humility and that that's okay. And again, like asking questions, being wrong, learning new things, changing your mind. I'm not saying like being a flip-flopper and not having any like core values or like I don't know what is right, but you have your core and you're okay to be like, "Oh, well, I thought this was really healthy and I dug into it deeper. It turns out this isn't good for my family, so I'm not going to do it." You shouldn't hold
Yeah,
shame or guilt
exactly.
for that or whatever. Like I said, if you can't let go of Disney because you love it so much, but you're like okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from, then maybe just look at what Disney videos then, which ones really align with the story that you want to be like your kids to learn, like there are
Mhm.
good lessons as long as they have attachment to reality, attachment to their parents, attachment to the values and morals that your family has as a unit and not being raised by outside entities because then again, they're not learning how to develop themselves uniquely. They're learning to attach to things on the outside that people deem worthy and cool and da 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 da
With
da. And then they develop their personality and who they are based on those exterior things. And they have no connection to themselves. And then
and those
emotions come up and they're like, I don't know what to do with this because I live in this reality I've created.
and the external will always change, so
Yeah.
you're always going to be confused or trying
Mhm.
to fit the mold. It's
Yeah.
always
The
going to change,
changes.
so that will
Like look at
create.
eyebrows. For an
What?
example, I said like eyebrows for an example. Like the
Right?
90s, it was like nothing. Like literally, like remember Monica Geller? Like there was no eyebrows. And then the 2000s, they came with like a little bit thicker. And then there was like the fucking giant ones. And then like now it's like have a little bit here, have, you know what I mean? And it will change because that changes so much. And if your identity is attached to that, you're going to have a hard time. Right. So it's like, just
Yeah.
own your fucking eyebrows the way that you like to do them. You know, you don't have to follow the trends. Just be your damn eyebrows how they want to be, you know? Like, because some people in the 90s are like, fuck, I can't get microblading now because that'll just look stupid because I literally have one line of eyelash or they never grew back or, you know what I mean? Like I said the other day, I went to Niagara and there was I was ironing a shirt and I just looked at the iron. I was like, oh, my neck from like ironing my hair when I was a kid with an actual iron. Like, you
Oh
know, we
my.
didn't know. We didn't know. Like,
And then yeah, like and then I think the trends come back too, and it's my friend, she's like, my kids are wearing like baggy pants and like rock bands t-shirts, and they're like, this is what's cool, and it's like, you are your mom because I
yeah.
used to so
And it's just so funny because we're like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I went to the bar for the first time and like the only time, like 6 months ago, was the first time I've been here. And I was like, oh my God, it's the same music, but just EDM. Like nothing has changed and nothing has changed. I don't know if I love that or hate that, but it kind of makes me feel good to being like, no, this is just the phase of the life and that's what it is, right? But it is cool to grow up and be in our I don't know how your age, but I'm like now in my 30s learning this stuff, watching my mom go through it in her 50s. Because then I feel like the next generation, like your daughter's learning this stuff now, right? That
mhm.
is so crucial. That means that like you are literally helping make the next generation more aware, have an easier life. And isn't that what we're supposed to do? And somehow we're making it harder for them. Like, y'all, we got this twisted. We got to back up here. We got to back
Yeah,
up here and
we
figure out what's really important for these kids. You know, it's
we need
not
to, yeah, be the
it's not
adults,
Hollywood. Yeah.
and we
100%.
need to let the kids be kids, like I feel,
Yeah.
and then be aware of what we're teaching them, and if it's going to help them when they're adults, or if it's just, if I could reduce my daughter's struggles by what I learned in my 30 years, then I feel like she's halfway there, or even better. Like, she's learning how to breathe at 3.5, and how
Yeah.
to feel, and that it's okay to feel upset and not suppress it.
Yeah.
Like, she's way ahead of me.
I love that. And you know what? I honestly feel like that's the pride of a parent though, right? You're like, holy shit, I did my job because my kid is excelling more than me. And some parents can't do that. They see the jealousy and they feel like, oh, they never got those opportunities, and it's really sad when you're that. And I feel bad for that because that wound must be so deep. And I really hope for your soul that like that can heal soon because realistically, no matter what, there's always going to be someone that has better than you or you had it worse then. And it's like, to me, that's what generations are, is that, we didn't go through a physical war. We are going through an information war. It's a different type of war. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for those behind us that physically fought in the war to defend us. And I'm equally grateful to the people that are fighting in the information war right now, in the spiritual war or have you. And I see that just as valuable. And I feel like, 20, 30 years down the road, it'll be people thanking, the digital warriors that went through and were misinformation and, being okay to be canceled and be vulnerable and be
Yeah,
open and talk about things. To me, we're changing that. And that's what you should want to be. You should want to be that generation that was different and that asked the questions and changed the status quo.
question the narratives and the authorities, right? And it's like, hey, wait a minute, no, like, this is not good. Like, we don't want this for our kids.
No, and you have to stand up, guys. I know it's scary and I know it's hard sometimes. And for whatever that is, and I'm not saying you go out and fight people or start riots, but it's, by taking control of your life and not having an outside entity be controlled of you and your family, right? Who runs your kids' narratives? Is it Disney? Is it fucking Caillou? Like, can we just, like, what? How is that show still even on? What? Like, I think if I had kids, it would be like retro cartoons. Like, not even that, because you think of like Scooby Doo and Shaggy, and like that shit's weird too. But
Yeah.
like, it's just but it's still a little bit more innocent sometimes. I feel like we did have a little bit more innocence at the beginning
Yeah,
of
I
like,
was thinking about that. Like, the shows were different,
yeah,
and
like
some of
even
them,
Barney, like he
oh,
was a little bit different.
some they would just chase each other around. They wouldn't even talk.
Yeah,
Like,
and you're like, okay, well, at least they're not like putting weird things. But like, I used to think of like the big comfy couch. Like she did cute things. Like nowhere did she ever, I felt there was anything wrong with that. She'd always like did her clock and taught times. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is value in that kind of stuff. It's again, though, to what degree? Because you look at adults right now and look at, who fucking watches CNN all the time. You can hear it come out of their mouth when they listen to mainstream media. Think about that on a kid level. Same thing, but almost more dramatic because they can't discern. They can't use critical thinking. They can't, they're just like, okay, So that's really important. If you can hear that in the adults with the CNN, then what the fuck do you think kids are absorbing and repeating and doing? So just being aware. That's all. No judgment. Let your kids watch Caillou if you fucking want to. But being aware of how is it raising your kids? Is this aligning with your values? If it's not, out.
If your kid is getting really whiny, then you know why.
Well, I'm not exactly, if they're displaying the same behaviors, right? Because like, even with my cats, my one cat, he never cried, but the other one, he literally talks all day. And so the other one now sees that he gets what he wants when he cries. And at 8 years old has now developed a same squeak and now squeaks at me because he sees that they're fucking kids. They see that, they get it. They pick it up. It's behavior. Oh, kids are the same way. Okay. This kid is getting all this attention because they said this, so I'm going to say this, so I get the attention. And now all of a sudden we have litter boxes outside of fucking classrooms because someone wants to identify as a kitty cat and no one wants to tell that kid that's not reality. Like, sorry, we won't go on that tangent, but that's what I'm talking about. Like where we have to watch or things will get extreme. And now these kids, they're afraid because these kids are going to commit suicide and all that because they've got so wrapped up. Like, just try not to get to that point. I know it's almost hard, but I feel like if you are connected, if you're opening that safe space with your child, they'll more likely come talk to you, not talk to online people that are validating their confusion with their own confusion and fueling that, right? And then parents aren't involved, and then it's like, oh, the parents are being bad parents, and it's like, no, they're not. They're just fighting the woke mob. It's hard.
Yeah, they're trying to protect their kids from the craziness of the world, and yeah, it starts at home. It really does. And the foundation at home. I hope that will, protect them from the craziness out there. Like as parents, we can only hope that we did the best and we made the best choices we could.
Yeah, totally.
What we had, right? And I think that's kind of what we should all strive for. And just, the more we know, like the better we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And by doing that is sharing. And you don't need to be a professional. You don't need to be an expert or have a certification in a field to be a fucking parent and share your experiences and be vulnerable. Do you know how many of my parents' friends that are vulnerable about their lives, how much more their lives have been enriched, and how many friends they have with community that come to them in times of need because, she was vulnerable there about her divorce. Now I feel like I can go talk to you. So many people talk to me about divorce just because I've shared that I've been on here. I'm not a fucking therapist. I have no idea what happened in yours, but I can tell you what happened to me and how I got through it and all that stuff. And maybe you can take something and apply it to your life. And that costs no money. I don't know why that's so discredited, right? So it's just like, parents, talk about it. If you're like vulnerable, there's going to be a parent, maybe they don't relate in that vulnerability, but they'll be like, okay, I'm good here, but I fucked up here. And that's kind of like the same, and just, you guys could learn so much from each other this way, I find, but it's just so hard because we're told to be better than everyone, keep up with the Joneses, like, and it's like, again, that's Hollywood programming you to do that. Cause like, you wouldn't care. You wouldn't know what a fancy house was and all that. If it wasn't shown to you, you wouldn't know those things. You don't just make that up. Like, you'd be making up your thoughts with what you know in reality, like we did growing up with what we see, not what we see on social media. And these kids, that's what their emotions and thought of what life is being constructed on.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to definitely, I feel like it's an urgent thing that we need to do for kids because we are seeing already the damage that the last 2 years have caused.
Totally.
And it's not their fault. Like they need strong adults around them that know what is true and what is right from wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're slowly getting there. And I think the pandemic woke a lot of people up to like, okay, maybe I need to pay attention to these things a little bit more. And this has more effect than I'm originally thinking it does. And I think that's really important. I think that's awesome. I think technology and all this stuff is great. Progression is great as long as we're just aware at some of the bad and protect, right? So this has been so much fun. I hope you're having had a good time. This has been great.
Yeah,
There's
this
so
was
much
good.
programming, guys. Watch for it.
Yeah, like, there's so many topics we could talk forever about this stuff, but just to start the conversation, and that's why you guys do a really good job with the podcast, just getting these conversations started, and people get, they start thinking about it and they're like, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Maybe I should look into it.
Yeah, especially if we pissed you off. That's my favorite. My favorite is like, you know what? I watched one of your shows. You said something that pissed me off. So then I went and looked into it and fuck, you were right.
Right?
And I'm not saying I'm right about everything, but that's all we want is the conversations to get started so that y'all can talk to each other. I have no parenting advice. I'm sorry. I don't have one. I have one from an outsider's view as an auntie, as a, best friend, as just a human being, as a sister. But, my point is that if I don't have that, I want people to come on and share those experiences because other moms will be like, yeah, I'm not comfortable with this either. And I don't have to feel crazy in that anymore. And that I get to decide that for myself and my family. And now I feel empowered to do that. And I don't have to do what everyone else is doing. And if someone makes fun of me about it, oh, well, that's a representation of them. Let's be honest. And by me going forward, I'm teaching my kids that it's okay to be strong, even if it's not what everyone else is doing. I think that's the biggest life lesson and key you could give your children is being yourself despite what everyone else says. Now, if you're being an asshole, that's a different story. But, like those things that
Anybody or
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I just think it's really cool. And I think once we start realizing that our kids are super influenceable. Yeah. Then we can start like thinking about, okay, what other environments besides ourselves are affecting my kids? And that's all it has to start out, right? We're not saying cut everything out, remove them. Like you cannot do that to children. Do not uproot them, but just being aware that maybe after watching that movie, we have some conversations about it. Did you fully understand what that meant? Or you have any questions from that movie? Do you need me to clear up anything? Start opening those conversations so that they feel safe to have those discussions with you at the dinner table at dinner time or,
yes.
like having this, oh, something happened at school. Can we talk about it? Like I think that is super important and it's hard. Parenting is hard, guys. I know it was really fun making them and stuff. And like, it was probably really cute with like the baby belly and, their ooh goo gaga, cute little baby, like fart faces. So cute. But we turn into walking meat sacks that are fucked up. So let's think about, how can we help these meat sacks be a little less psychotic as adults?
Yes, so we don't have a crazy society.
I would like to age and retire without having to do much. I just want to go into an old folks home with cats and other old ladies, do a bunch of drugs and laugh about the good old days. I don't have to worry about, the next generation not being able to carry on our universe, society or whatever, you know what I mean? But anyways, this has been so amazing. I hope you had a good time. Welcome to the addiction of podcasting. I told you, once you get the first one and you see how easy and fun it is and how you can literally talk for 17 hours, like, okay, this has got to be a follow-up because there's a lot more to this. And I think it would be really cool if we could like dive deeper, like in what kind of sense of programming, like video games. I used to be like, no, video games do nothing. And then I look at the violent society and I'm like, okay, maybe it did do things. Maybe Grand Theft Auto wasn't a good idea, beating up hookers and like selling cocaine on a video game that any kid had access to.
Yeah, we talked a lot about girls and video games, something that affects a lot of boys.
And porn and the porn industry. Like that's a big one that, we're going to talk about because they look at a scan of a porn addict and a meth addict and the scans are the same. It's the same chemical compounds, right? But no one's talked about that. If anything, you're a prude if you aren't into porn or into that kind of stuff. And you're not into women and men empowerment if you're kind of like, let's dial back to sexualization, and it's sad because it's like, okay, sure. Anyways, whole new topic, but thank you so much for coming on the show today. I hope you had a good time.
I did. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Okay, good. Everyone, thank you guys so much for listening to us. I hope you enjoyed this month of talking about the fucking weirdness of Hollywood and the fact that we need to talk about this more. Follow us on all of our social media, on our platforms, podcast, Spotify, YouTube, all that fun stuff. Until next time, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys for stopping by the show today. We appreciate you so much. If you like this episode and you want to see more, make sure to show us some love on our Instagram page, the Be Real Babe Podcast. You can follow us on YouTube. Make sure you're turning on those notifications for Apple and Spotify so you get notified as soon as an episode drops. Or you can become a member of our Patreon page with extra content and early access. But make sure to stay tuned for more realness coming to you next week, babes.